Hey, what's up everybody? It's Ty.
And Rick from Montana Outlaw BBQ. Today is our fourth video of a championship series. Today is brisket.
Yeah, so we're gonna show you what we do to a $240 Snake River Farms brisket. It's gonna make some of you cry when you see how much we trim off of this thing. We take a full packer brisket, we trim it into our two parts. We get our flat, we get our point. We're doing burn ends, we're doing slices, competition style. And it's what we do when we're out barbecuing on the circuit.
So if you want to make the best brisket you ever had, follow along. You'll enjoy the video.
We know it's intimidating, but we're here to help. So for today's video, we're gonna be using a Snake River Farms black grade brisket. This brisket comes in at just over 19 pounds. You can see the fat in it. You can see the marbling in it. Now it's time to get to work. Let's get to trimming. The first thing we're gonna wanna do is we wanna be able to separate the flat and the point. And so we need to be able to identify where those two pieces are. What I'm doing here is I'm removing the hard fat that's on the outside of this brisket. You'll notice it's easily identifiable. Grab it. Trim off the top, take your knife, poke it in, kind of just edge it out. You'll kind of V-cut that out of there. And as you get in there, you'll be able to take your fingers, work it back. You can see how the fat kind of just separates away like any other muscle would be on a big cut of meat. Okay, now that we're done with that, we want to take off this outside edge. What we're really trying to do here is that's where the butcher would have cut that before. Could be a little bit discolored. Don't worry, that's not bad meat. It's not going to taste bad. A lot of times these are cut with like a water jet. It's just maybe where there was a little burn from the scalding water from the water jet, but we're going to take that off for competition. It's not going to do us any good, and it allows us to see the good thickness of the flat, which is really what we're looking for as we're separating these two pieces. We want to make sure we get the good thick parts of the flat. So what I'm doing now is we're just gonna go ahead and take off any of this kind of white fat that's on top of the flat, on the meat side, as we'll like to call it going forward from here on out. We wanna make sure that most of the meat is exposed. We wanna get as much of that silver skin off as possible. We wanna get most of that extra fat off. That extra fat, if you leave it there, is gonna render out. It's not gonna affect the flavor any. At home, you probably wouldn't have to worry about doing too much of this on just a weekend brisket cook. But what it is gonna do is it is gonna prevent your seasonings from penetrating into the meat as much as you would like. You're not gonna get the salt penetration that's gonna extract some of that water, the natural water content in here. And it's just not gonna be able to really give itself a lot of flavor. The rub might be more apt to slough off as you're going throughout the cooking process. So just clean that up as much as you can. Get rid of as much of that silver skin, much like the membrane on the back of a rib. We would just wanna clean that up so that we can expose as much of the meat, the actual meat, as possible. So take your time, do this. Again, for competition, we're gonna be a little bit more extensive with how much of this we're gonna cut off. We're not gonna trim off as much as if we're just doing a weekend cook or a catering job. Now that we've got a bulk of that off, it's time to separate the point and the flat. What I'm doing here is I found that exposed fat seam, so I'm just gonna work my knife around it. Again, pulling back with one hand, cutting with the other. You're gonna find that natural seam. It's gonna come apart easy, and it's going to just pull away like any other big muscle would. So do that. You're gonna see it and feel it getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And when you reach that point where it's thin, it's gonna start to cut away. Just square off the point and the flat. We're gonna separate these completely for today's cook. Again, at home, if you're cooking a whole packer, unless you're really wanting those burn ends, you could stop right about here, clean up some of that hard fat. You're still gonna get your burn ends, but you wouldn't have to be as extensive as we are for competition. But for us to get the slices that we want, the burn end styles that we want, we need those two pieces separated. So now that I've got it separated, it's time to start to clean up some of this brownish fats on the back. For competition, we aren't going to turn in anything that has that fat left on it. We're gonna slice that off after the cooking process. And so we are going to use it to help us level this piece up. We want good airflow, think aerodynamics. You want that smoke to flow evenly over the top of it. So we're gonna use that fat on the back to kind of level that up. So it could be a 1/4 inch, could be an 1/8 inch in places. It just depends on how that brisket naturally works out. We're gonna flip this brisket back over and we're gonna start to square it up. We are not going to cook the whole flat. We want the prime pieces of the flat. We want the best pieces. We are going to be turning in an 8 and a 9-inch styrofoam container, so we don't want slices that are wider than our container box. So we use our knife. We have our knife here that we're trimming with. We're going to use that as our gauge. We're going to use that knife as our gauge. We're going to measure out the width of that brisket. We want to retain the thickest part of the brisket. So you can see we're getting rid of that thin slice, or that thin side of the brisket. We're going to retain the nice fat thick slices. You can see how it's uneven. We're going to want to make sure we level that up, we even that up. Again, here I go with my knife, measuring it out, make sure that I don't have anything that's too wide. Also, I don't want anything that's too narrow. I want all the slices to be the same width from start to finish. And you can see Snake River Farms, notorious for great briskets. We get some bigger ones, but that is a nice, big, thick flat. We're gonna take our boning knife here. We want to work with fine, really kind of delicate knives here. We don't want anything that's big and beefy. We want to be able to work to make sure we're taking off a little bit more here, leaving some there, so that we get that levelness. We're also exposing the good white fat that's going to render out. It's going to give us a little bit of flavor, but not a lot. Again, we're not looking for a lot of that fat for competition purposes. We're going to finish up here by squaring it off, rounding off our edges. We want to round off the edges of our brisket so that when we go to slice those final slices for presentation, we don't want anything to crumble. We don't want our edges that we worked so hard to put rub on, to create bark on. We don't want those to slough off. So we're gonna roll all our edges, top and bottom, so that we get really good slices when it's all said and done. So just take your knife, flip it over, and kind of just cut it at about a 45-degree angle or so. That's gonna give you kind of a rounded edge. Do that on all sides. And so everything, here's a little pro tip for you guys. Everything you can see that I'm cutting off, I'm setting aside, I'm not throwing that away. That's gonna make me a really, really good burger. See, Montana Outlaw BBQ smash burger video. Take this burger, make yourself a good smash burger out of it. We grind ours up at the end of the year, so at the end of a competition year, we're gonna have quite a bit of burger that we're gonna be able to use throughout the winter. So don't throw that burger away, don't throw that meat away, grind it up, make yourself some good burger. It's awesome in tacos, it's awesome as a whole host of things, but anything you'd use your ground beef for, this Wagyu brisket, or any brisket for that matter that you trim up, go ahead and grind that up. We're gonna finish up here by just removing a little bit more of this white fat, this silver skinny fat that's gonna prevent our rub from penetrating. We don't have a whole lot left to do on this brisket flat. We're gonna move over to the point here pretty soon. Trim up any last minute pieces that you have there. Again, most of that is gonna render out, it's gonna even out. Pretty happy with how that cut out, so let's move on to the point. The point of the brisket is gonna be your fattier part of the brisket. If you go to a smokehouse in Texas or any really good smokehouse, they're gonna ask you, do you like lean cuts, do you like fatty cuts of brisket? Well, this is what they're talking about when they have their fatty cut. This is the point. It's naturally a lot more fatty than the flat is. It's gonna have a lot more flavor naturally just because of the marbling that's deep into the muscle. But we also need to render more of it out. So it's gonna cook a little bit longer, and it's gonna cook even longer if I don't take any of this fat off. So I wanna take almost 100% of this exterior fat off, and I wanna have all of the meat exposed. You're gonna see as I trim it out here, just how much fat is down inside the muscle of the point. So we wanna make sure that that has a chance to absorb some of our rub, absorb some of our injection. And so we need to get all this surface fat out of the way. Again, like our brisket flat, we're only gonna be cooking the prime part of this. So we're gonna trim it up, and then we're gonna thin it down. We're gonna cook the thickest parts because we want nice, even cubes when we go to turn in burn-ins to the judges. We also want the stuff that has the best flavor. And here's another competition tip. You are not required to turn in burn-ins. A lot of people will turn in both burn-ins and slices. I can tell you that just slices alone have got us 180s, have won us contests, category wins in brisket, so you do not need to turn in burn-ins. But if they are good, if you can cook them well and on a particular day they turn out exceptional, they do not hurt to turn in. I believe the judges truly like to see them in there, but they are not a requirement. So, use your best judgment. We always cook them at a contest, and I would say 75% of the time we're probably not going to put them in our box because they just didn't hit the tenderness that we want. They maybe were a little salty that day. They have a tendency to be a little saltier. So we're going to be pretty hesitant to include them unless they are just really, really good. So put them in if they're great. Don't feel bad if they don't turn out. Don't feel like you have to turn those in. So we're going to go ahead and trim that up. There's going to be some harder fats on the outside edge where you can see that concentration of that marbling. Most of that is going to render out. We're going to trim off this fat. Set that fat aside with your lean cuts that you trimmed off your brisket flat. That's what's going to make that burger really, really good. So, go ahead and make sure you hold on to that. And again, we're looking for a nice square piece. I'm feeling around to make sure I've got all the hard fats out of there. And then I'm going to take off a little bit more here and expose. There's a thinner part here you can see I'm working on. I'm going to go ahead and trim that off. I'm going to add that over into my grinding pile. That piece right there is not going to cook out well. So let's go ahead and get that pulled out. One last check. This side has a little bit more of that hard fats on there, so I want to get rid of that. So there we go. We've got it all trimmed up. Let's get to injecting. Let's get to seasoning. For today's injection, we're going to be using Cosmo's Reserve Blend beef injection. We like it. It's got a good beefy flavor. It's loaded with phosphates. It's going to help break it down. It's always treated us really well. Cosmo's injections are a really good injection. Highly recommend you go check them out. When we make our injection, we make it as it says right on the box or right on the bag. No need to do anything too special. We do add a teaspoon of white pepper. We like the little bit of kick that gives down inside the beef. It does actually come through pretty well in the cooking process, I feel like. It's something we've done for a lot of years. Just adds a nice little kick. Feel free to do that. As we inject this brisket, you're going to see we're going to work in that kind of checkerboard pattern, 1-inch squares. We're going to go along, up and down that whole brisket. And you'll see as we inject that brisket, we're working it in and out. We want to make sure it gets all the way through the brisket. It's not going to leave streaks in it. It's not going to leave a pointed hole in it, but you can see the way that brisket is plumping up. It's going to take and it's going to absorb those phosphates. It's going to absorb the flavors into the marbling that's inside of there. And it's going to work really well when we apply our rub. The rub is going to naturally extract some of the water in the injection that's in there. It's also going to extract some of the natural water that's left in that brisket. And it's going to just concentrate those fats. The phosphate and the seasonings are going to latch onto the marbling that's going to stay in there. And it's just going to give you a really intense beef flavor through the entire brisket. So we're going to do that through the whole brisket. Now that we're done with the flat, we're going to move over to the point. Because the point has so much more natural fat in it, we don't need to inject it quite as heavy. So we're going to put in about half the amount that we would put in that flat. No need to flip these briskets over. No need to do other sides. Inject them, and let's clean it up and let's get moved on to seasoning. For today's seasoning, we're going to be using Blues Hog Bold and Beefy as our base. It's really good. It's got a lot of garlic. It's got a lot of onion flavors. It's got some black pepper. Not a lot of sugars in it. It truly is true to its name, bold and beefy. We really like the flavors. It complements our Montana Outlaw BBQ beef rub really well. Just all around really good stuff by itself or in a combination of a couple of rubs. So check it out. It's a really great product. After we get done applying that, kind of a medium light coat, we're going to go over it with a medium heavy coat of our Montana Outlaw beef rub. This one is going to be heavy in paprikas. It's going to add that nice red color. It's also going to have the activated charcoal, sea salt, ground pepper in it. Of course, ground pepper, so we get that pepper kick. We get the activated charcoal for a little bit of a smoky kick in there. That paprika adds that beautiful color. And of course, the salt to make sure that we're extracting some of that natural water and concentrating those flavors. So we're going to hit that on the back. On the sides, when we do it here, we're only going to be applying the Montana Outlaw beef rub. We're not looking for a lot more flavor additions on the edges. We're just looking for that color and a set good bark. So we'll flip over the point. We'll hit the edges of the flat with a Montana Outlaw beef rub. And again, we're going to go medium heavy, enough to cover up the grain of the meat. Most of that's going to soak in. You're not going to even notice that you've put on a lot. Briskets are a big cut, like we've talked about in the past. You want to make sure that you really hit your big cuts with a lot of meat, or with a lot of seasoning. They're a big cut of beef. They take a lot of seasoning, unlike a chicken or a pork chop or a steak, where you need to be a little bit more delicate with it. You can apply a large amount of rub to these bigger cuts, your briskets, your pork butts, your roasts, those sort of things. So go ahead and hit the top side just the same as you have the back side. And there we go. You can already start to see the salt's doing its job. It's extracting some of that flavor. We're gonna let this sit in the refrigerator for 6 to 7 hours before we cook it. Now that we're done with that, let's get it on the smoker. Today, we're gonna be using our Outlaw smoker. We got that thing running at 300 degrees, running on hickory and cherry. And we're gonna go ahead and get that brisket set in flat on the grates there. There's our point going in. We're gonna cook that for about an hour at 300 degrees, at which time we're gonna come on back. We're gonna grab the parquet squeeze butter. You can already see the color is starting to set in on there, but you can see it's starting to dry out a little bit. So that parquet butter is going to add a little bit of shine to it. It's gonna help protect that rub from burning on us. We wanna make sure it doesn't get too dark, but at the same time, keeping everything nice and moist. So again, this is an hour in. Apply a good amount of that parquet squeeze butter. Shut your door, check it about every hour or so, and hit it with water. Again, you can see this color. This is about 2 hours in, 2.5 hours into the smoke. You can see that color that's setting on there. So we're just gonna hit it with water. Why water? We're just looking to keep that rub moist. We don't want that rub to burn. We also don't want to add a whole lot of extra flavors, so we don't want to use like apple juice or anything like that may be inconsistent. Shut your door back up. Let's come back in at 3 hours into the cook. At 3 hours into the cook, it's time to wrap. You can see we've set the color. At this time, we want to stop that color from going any further. We want to protect it. For our wrap, we're going to add dehydrated onion, a little spritz over the top with water. Dehydrated onions, wrap it up. We want this to take a bath in its own fat, so we're not going to add any type of moisture to it. We're not going to add anything else to it. It's going to have a lot of natural beefy flavors just from the fat and that injection that's still left in there. So a little bit of that onions on top. Don't worry about those onions. They are going to melt out throughout this cooking process. We got about 2.5 to 3 hours left. We're looking for an internal temperature of somewhere between 205 and 209, depending on where we're cooking that particular day. But really what we're looking for is like a hot knife through butter. We want it nice, tender. When you slide that thermopin in, it needs to be tender. And now that we've had our cook, we've gone 6 hours at 300 degrees. It's time to pull this off. You can see that work that we did, rounding that brisket off, making sure it's the right width, helps protect that rub from falling off when we go to slice. We get nice, even, rounded slices all the way through that we can cut nice and thick, and the rub stays right where it is. I went ahead and glazed this brisket with Blues Hog Smoky Mountain over the top. For Kansas City style, I like to turn in something that's a little bit sweeter. But as I turn it around, you can see that smoke ring that's in there. You can see I got nice even slices. I'm gonna hit the front of them with a little bit of sauce. You can thin this down with the beef fat that rendered out of that. That's gonna be inside your tin foil if you want. There's a number of options. You don't have to sauce if you're doing more Texas style. But for me, for today, I like that Blues Hog Smoky Mountain. Gives it a nice little sweetness to it. Offset some of that pepper, some of that salt, some of that garlic that we add in there. Now let's go ahead and cut up our burnt ends. Our burnt ends, we're looking for 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch cubes. I wanna make sure again that I don't slough that rub off the outside edges, because those are the pieces that I'm gonna want to put into the box. So go ahead and cut those up. At a competition, I'm gonna toss these in our Blues Hog Smoky Mountain sauce. I'm gonna put them back on the smoker for about 10 minutes just to set that glaze. For today, I'm just gonna go ahead and sauce them up, and we're gonna get them in front of you. Like I say, don't feel like you have to burn ends. On this particular brisket, these burn ends turned out really, really well. They were the bomb, they were dynamite. I would turn these in at a competition any day. I'd be happy with this cook for what I turned in at a competition. I think it would score really, really well. You can see I'm getting 6 nice even cubes to put in on top of that. I mean, that's all you're looking for right there. You're looking for a nice box that's gonna be the right width. To fit in your box, it's not gonna roll the edges. We're gonna take about 8 slices out of that. Let's go ahead and grab a piece. I'm gonna show you, we're gonna cut the bottom fat off of that. Tenderness is gonna have just a nice little bit of tug, but not too much. It's gonna break away even, but it's not gonna be mushy and crumbly either. So let's go ahead and grab that piece and I'll show you what I mean here. We'll grab one out of the middle. You can see we got a good bend on it. You see we got a little tug, nice, doesn't crumble on me, but when you take that bite, it is so tender, so flavorful. Man, there it's at. Good competition brisket right there.
Thanks for tuning in for another one of our championship videos. I hope you enjoyed it. We enjoyed doing it. Stop in and sit.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe, tap the bell. You don't want to miss any of the videos that we have coming up. And if you have any questions about today's video, leave a comment down below. We want to hear from you. We want to help you out. If you're interested in competition barbecue, that's what we're here for. We're here to help you get involved. So head on over also to our social media on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find lots of tips and tricks there all the way throughout the month and throughout the year. And as we go around and we do more videos and we do more competitions.
You see us out and about, pull over and see us, visit with us. We'd love to visit with you sometime.
Yeah, great day. Thank you.
Thanks.